Good evening, everyone. My name is Travis Mitchell. I'm the mayor of Kyle, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening for the City of Kyle's final open house about the proposed public safety center. We have hosted a total of 5 open houses, including tonight's event, each with the same presentation to provide opportunities for every Kyle resident to get more information and have their questions answered about Proposition A. I want to start off the top the way I've started every time there's been a conversation about Proposition A, and that is to inform you that as the mayor, I'm not, my role here today is not to advocate for or against the bond. I'm hoping to provide factual information and answer your questions about the proposition. The City of Kyle is committed to service, community, and innovation. We support the city and all departments in attracting, developing, and retaining a highly qualified and diverse workforce. We want to share more information about Proposition A and the public safety needs of our growing population. Kyle's a growing city, and as the community grows, our public safety needs grow too. I'm going to play a quick video that talks a little more about where we are.
Did you know that the City of Kyle population has grown from about 6,000 residents to more than 52,000 residents in the last 20 years? And did you know that the Kyle Police Department is currently understaffed and spread thin across 3 different facilities, including an old bank building with officers working out of bank vaults? This was always intended to be a temporary solution. In fact, efforts to house the Kyle PD in a single location date back to 2011. As our community grows, our public safety needs grow too. That's why Kyle City Council has called for Proposition A $37 million bond election to fund a new public safety center. If voters pass Proposition A on Tuesday, November 3rd, the city would be able to finance the design and construction of a new public safety center to serve residents for the next 20 years. This project could begin construction in spring 2021 and be completed in roughly 14 months. It's important to note that in light of COVID-19, the city would also be deferring the tax rate impact, meaning residents wouldn't see the estimated $13 a month increase until October 2021. A new public safety center would have dedicated space to expand police department services and potentially improve emergency response times, pursue accreditation, and increase officer training. Fully staff the department with additional mental health professionals, trauma support services, a K-9 unit, and additional sworn officers. Expand community engagement programs. And build out an emergency operations center where the city could collaborate with surrounding authorities during critical times, such as natural disasters, community-wide security threats, or even pandemics like COVID-19. This public safety center is an investment in our community. To learn more about Proposition A or how a new public safety center will help address the safety needs of our growing population, visit cityofkyle.com/bond.
Thank you. As you can see, the need for a new public safety facility has existed for a long time. And while the unprecedented situation with COVID-19 has impacted everyone in Kyle and beyond, it has also reinforced the need for a dedicated space for the city to provide public safety services to our residents. Initial discussions, as you heard in the video, about the need for a new public safety facility date all the way back to 2011, when a needs assessment for the Kyle Police Department was first conducted by Brinkley Sargent Architects. A follow-up study was conducted by Brinkley Sargent in 2019, which updated the projected facility needs for the police department by 2029 and 2039. These studies looked only at facility requirements for the police department and did not take into account additional square footage to establish an emergency operations center or any space required to support the additional public safety services provided by the city. In addition to the police department needs analysis, we heard from the community that public safety needs were an important concern through our Future of Kyle 2020 community survey that was conducted earlier this year. One of the things we heard was that the construction of a police safety facility was one of the top priorities for residents in the next budget year. We also heard that over 90% of respondents agreed that traffic law enforcement is extremely or somewhat important. And finally, 98% of respondents believe that crime prevention and deterrence is extremely or somewhat important. With all of the data collected about Kyle's growing public safety needs going back to 2011, City Council voted unanimously to call a $37 million bond election on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020, which seeks voter approval for Proposition A to finance the construction of a public safety center that will support our growing community. It's important to note that in light of COVID-19, the city would be deferring the tax rate impact until October 2021 as part of the city's fiscal year 2022 budget, meaning that if passed, community members wouldn't see this property tax rate increase for more than a year. As part of the planning that took place before calling the bond election on August 17th, the city formed a task force in 2018 to officially begin the process of researching and designing a public safety center for consideration of bond funding. The task force is made up of representatives from the city, police department, and the community. After extensive research of facilities and other municipalities, the task force identified the police headquarters and College Station, shown here, and New Braunfels as an ideal model for Kyle's proposed public safety center. Both facilities were designed by the architecture firm PGAL, and in early 2020, City Council approved funding for a contract with PGAL to begin customizing an existing design for the proposed public safety center. Using the existing facility design provided the city with an opportunity to expedite the design process, and if passed by voters in November, the design would be finalized and construction could begin in spring 2021. The city anticipates a 14-month timeline for construction of the public safety center, which would open in 2022. Now, you've been hearing me use the term public safety center a lot this evening. So what exactly does that mean? The Kyle Public Safety Center would be a facility dedicated to serving the public safety needs of our community. In an effort to avoid another temporary facility for the police department, the proposed 64,000 square foot, two-story building would provide space to fully staff the police department in a single location with room to grow over the next 20 years. Our public safety needs go beyond the police department, of course, which I'll talk about more in a moment. But let me start off by talking through what the proposed facility would include for our police department. The proposed Public Safety Center would be located on Marketplace Avenue at Kohler's Crossing in the Uptown development on land that was dedicated to the city of Kyle for free. The location is marked on this slide with the red star. Compared to the current headquarters, the proposed location would increase access across the city with the potential for more efficient response times by removing the immediate proximity to the train tracks and offering access to East Kyle via 1626 and South and North Kyle via I-35. And additionally, Marketplace Avenue, when it is finished, will give direct route south straight to HEB. As I previously mentioned, the Kyle Police Department is currently understaffed, and as our population grows, that gap continues to grow. The proposed public safety center would allow the city to fully staff the police department at the recommended ratio of 1.5 officers per 1,000 residents within budget allowances. And specifically, there would be space to bring in more community engagement staff as well as additional mental health and trauma support specialists. In the proposed public safety center, there would be an investigation suite that offers additional privacy and can accommodate victims or residents experiencing trauma as a result of crime. In the current headquarters, the evidence room is nearly full. However, the police department is legally required to store certain evidence for decades, and the space needed will only grow with our growing population. In the proposed public safety center, there would be additional space to store and protect evidence, as well as an in-house crime and evidence lab. The proposed public, the proposed facility would also allow the Kyle Police Department to pursue accreditation from the Law Enforcement Recognition Program through the Texas Police Chiefs Association, as well as the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, which opens up opportunities for the Kyle Police Department to pursue various grants that could further improve recruitment, training, and public safety services for the community. Accreditation from CALEA provides greater accountability within the agency and increased community advocacy through a set of standards that clearly define authority, performance, and responsibilities. The proposed Public Safety Center would also provide dedicated space to expand community-based programs like the Citizens Police Academy and Citizens on Patrol, which connect the police department with the residents it serves. The city would also be able to offer new programs and services for residents that the current police headquarters cannot support, such as the Youth Explorer program and Neighborhood Watch program meetings. So, as I mentioned before, our public safety needs go beyond the police department, and the proposed facility would provide dedicated space for the city to establish an emergency operations center. An Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, would allow for better collaboration between the City of Kyle and surrounding counties and authorities during critical times. EOCs establish a central command center for all public safety services, that's police, fire, EMS, and local leadership, to collect and analyze data and make strategic and operational decisions to protect the community during emergencies. Emergencies often addressed in an EOC include, but are not limited to, weather-related natural disasters, which we've had several of just since I've been on the council, community-wide security threats such as school shootings or hostage situations, major traffic accidents on I-35, or even pandemics like COVID-19. In addition to establishing an EOC and providing room for the police department to grow over the next 20 years, the Public Safety Center would also provide immediate temporary space for ancillary public safety functions, including IT, communications, some city administration, until the police department requires the full building. The proposed bond, Proposition A, is estimated to cost approximately $37 million. If passed, the city anticipates raising the property taxes by an estimated 7 cents per $100 of valuation during the 20-year life cycle of these general obligation bonds. That means the average property owner with a $216,000 home within the city of Kyle would see their property taxes increase approximately $13.50 per month, or about $160.50 per year. As a reminder, in light of COVID-19, the city would be deferring the tax rate impact until 2021. Many residents have been asking the City Council what happens if the bond does not pass. It's important to note that if Proposition A does not pass, the city would not be able to issue debt through a certificate of obligation for a public safety center for a minimum of 3 years. Additionally, if Proposition A does not pass in November, the city will have to pursue alternative options to house the police department, which would include leasing, renovating, and retrofitting an existing space to add a fourth location. Funds for an interim solution would be pulled from the police department's operating budget and could affect other services, programming, and staffing. Initial calculations for an interim solution would cost the city an estimated $1 million per year. When you head to the polls, you'll see this official language on the ballot. What this ballot language means is that if passed, the funding from the proposed bond would finance the design, construction, and equipping of a public safety center that would open in 2022 and serve the residents for decades to come. This bond is an investment in our community. Here are a few important dates to remember. Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. Early voting starts today and takes place through October 30th. The last day to apply for a ballot by mail, received, not postmarked, is Friday, October 23rd. To apply for a ballot by mail, visit Hays County Government Center or the elections office online. You can also find all polling locations and hours on our website at cityofkyle.com/bond. Although tonight's event is the final open house for Proposition A, we want to remind the community that recordings of each presentation are available on our bond website. We hope that you'll encourage your neighbors to watch one of these recordings if they were unable to join a live event. On this slide, you can see the link for our bond webpage, cityofkyle.com/bond, as well as the bond hotline phone number and email. Please feel free to reach out to our team with any questions or feedback. Before we begin the Q&A portion of the evening, I want to emphasize that the proposed bond package for a public safety center, Proposition A, reflects the city's commitment to the proper and efficient progress of Kyle, which is part of our city charter. The proposed facility would allow the city to increase its public safety services to support our growing population. This is an investment in our community. Thank you all so much for tuning into this event. With that, we will now begin the Q&A. And as Patty mentioned earlier, Zoom attendees can leave questions or comments in the Q&A feature of the webinar. Facebook viewers can leave your questions as comments, and a representative from the city will share those with the team. And we'll read your questions out loud along with our answers.
Well, thank you, Mayor. It doesn't look like we have any questions submitted just yet. So for folks who are watching on Zoom, we encourage you again to use that Q&A function. You can find the icon at the bottom of your screen if you hover your mouse over the presentation. Go ahead and submit your questions there. And for folks on Facebook, again, you can leave those questions as a comment and we will receive those through a City of Kyle representative. Looks like we have one question shared by Karen in the chat. Asking for Chief Barnett, how do you feel about the facilities? Chief, would you like to share a little bit about, I know you participated in the bond task force, but some of the planning and the background?
I do, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you, Chief.
Okay, great. I would absolutely love to answer that question. I truly believe that the new facilities will provide us great opportunities to provide additional services to the community. I know we plan to grow our victim services unit. We plan to grow our offerings of mental health services and the number of officers that are trained in mental health response. The facility will give us additional rooms for training. It will give us additional rooms for storage. It will allow us, specifically speaking about our property and evidence room. We have highlighted in other meetings that our current property and evidence room is reaching capacity. And as highlighted in the mayor's comments earlier, we are required by law to keep evidence oftentimes for decades. And that has to be readily available for a court at any moment. So the needs of our storage for property and evidence, the needs of our training room space, the needs of additional facilities such as locker rooms and showers for the officers and other staff are things that will be able to provide a better workplace for our officers so that they can perform their services. And then specifically, it's going to allow us to offer additional services to the community, like I mentioned, through mental health, victim services, and juvenile services, things that we need the additional space to help offer those services to our community.
Great, thank you so much, Chief. We have another question that's come in from Yvonne on Facebook. She asks, what city departments aside from the police would use the facility? Mayor, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. The public safety center, the total square footage that was recommended from Brinkley Sargent was 44,000 square feet to provide for 20 years of growth for the police department. This facility is larger than that, as recommended by the task force. So the additional square footage we're using to relieve some of the pressure that is on the city administration, where we have some of our departments and hiring folks that are having to work in the hall because we're completely out of room. So communications, IT, city secretary, and a few other administrative positions and departments are going to go. And what we are focused on in particular is bringing the departments over. It's not City Hall, but it's bringing the departments over that are complementary to the police department, like communications, for example. Whenever there is a public safety emergency or just something of note to the community, our communications department works very closely with the police department in communicating with the residents. So it made a lot of sense to bring them over. Communication is also very important when we have an emergency command center situation, because they have to be there and present. The other one is IT. So there's just an incredible amount of technology behind the scenes that drive the police department. And our IT department has been growing lately and really doing a great job, but they have no space where they currently are. So this would allow for them in particular to come and set up and be much more of a 21st century IT department that serves both city administration and the police department.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, for anybody watching, please do feel free to submit additional questions. We don't have any at this time, but certainly welcome anything that you might have. Looks like we actually just had one more come in through Facebook from Steve. Have you explored other options like Travis County? Chief, I don't know if maybe you want to talk a little bit about how the police department, particularly the bond task force, really came to some of the recommendations here.
Yes, thank you. So once the task force was put into place, we were tasked with visiting police departments across the state, and then even looking at some either virtually or through information available to us that were even outside of the state. On those site visits, we tried to learn all of the best practices involved in a new police department. And we were trying to find a police department that would most suit our needs for the next 20 years and allow for the growth of our agency as our community continues to grow. The committee evaluated several different sites. We looked at the proper square footage for our growth. We looked at the proper operations that would allow us to serve the community. We settled on a facility that is the College Station Police Department, as you heard about earlier tonight. And that is because it most closely met our needs in both physical size to allow for growth, but also to allow for all of the operations that we hope to serve here in our community. One of the main things is we want to engage with our community. Our partnership with the community already exists with our Citizens Police Academy, our Citizens on Patrol, and some volunteers. However, the space that is needed to continue those operations and to grow those services would be met by this building if it were passed at this local bond election. So we tried to find something that would be suitable to sustain our growth and allow us to continue to grow our operations and our services in the community.
Great, thank you, Chief. We have another question from Yvonne on Facebook. What are the plans for the current police headquarters? Does the city own that building? Mayor, would you like to comment on if the bond was passed, what might happen with the existing facilities?
Well, the existing facilities are in a pretty wretched state. I'm as mayor for the last 3 years and on the council for the year and a half before that. I've had the opportunity to tour our police department, looking at the facility and structure itself, 3 or 4 times, as well as our dispatch center. We'll call it that because we have some great workers there doing the work admirably, but the facility itself is really not that adequate. So evidence storage as well is just a building that it's really run down and not suitable for the police department. So what we're focused on as a council, what we've been focused on is first solving the problem for the police department. And we're trying to take our cues from the public. So for example, we've never put forward a facilities bond in the history of the city of Kyle. Our city hall, our fire department, library, and other facilities were all passed through CO bonds, which means the city council by majority vote just went forward and built the facilities and did not seek voter approval. We've taken a very different approach on this bond. We had a lot of different options early on. We narrowed down those options to the facility that we proposed. We spent all of our time focusing on making sure that we weren't just proposing a general public safety center, but a specific public safety center with specific plans on a specific site. And now we're in a holding pattern, waiting on the residents really to let us know whether or not they wish for us to proceed. I think that's a very important point. So if the bond passes on November 3rd, it will be the prerogative of the council to first help facilitate the transition, which will take about, I think, 18 months to get the police department out of their current facilities and into the new facility. And over the course of that 18 months, the city council, I would expect, would start working through the question proposed. What do we do with these facilities? There's not a lot of options on the table right now because of the disrepair that the facilities are in. But I'm sure the council looks forward to navigating that and trying to make a wise decision there as well.
Great, thank you, Mayor. It looks like we don't have any other questions at the moment, but again, for those watching on Facebook, share those in the comments, and our Zoom attendees, please feel free to submit additional questions if you have them. We have another question that's come in from Facebook from Echo. She says, as this is the last open house, how does the city feel we as voters can make a logical, wise, and informed choice that would not only affect our lives and taxes, but the taxes of future generations, our children, regarding this bond when we're only given numbers and information about the new facility and no firm detailed answers or information regarding alternatives? It seemed to those questions asked prior, the answers have been a lot of, we'll look into that and get those numbers. Mayor and perhaps Chief as well, but would love to start with the Mayor. Could you talk a little bit about some of the alternatives that have been explored prior to this bond being called?
Sure, happily. In 2018, in particular, the City Council, so 2019 was all about preparing for, 2020 has been all about preparing for this specific bond. 2019 was all about narrowing down our options, and 2018 was all about understanding the needs. So we first started with a needs assessment. We spent a lot of time working with Brinkley Sargent to try to figure out specifically what the police department needed. Once we had that assessment put together, which said at the time that the police department was going to need about 44,000 square feet, the Brinkley Sargent, we at our request put together a series of options from a freestanding facility, which is what we currently have today, all the way to hybrid options, campus options, where we might, for example, take the current police department and expand into City Hall, and then City Hall would lease space somewhere else in order to keep our debt down and in order to keep our costs down. Ultimately, those decisions were struck down by the council for a variety of reasons, and on those basis, the testimony of the police department itself was very important for a variety of reasons. The department said that the satellite option, where you have multiple PD locations throughout the city, was inefficient. There was also conversations about why a freestanding building away from the train tracks was more important than to try to retrofit the current facilities because of the location and the proximity to the train tracks. There's just been so much. I mean, over the last 2 years, we've probably discussed the police department and the needs in these facilities 20 or 30 times in public forums, at council meetings, trying to solve these problems. We've taken, I don't know, 10 votes probably as it relates to all these items. So while it may seem as if not all the questions are answered in this particular proposal, that's because this proposal is the end of a long journey that we have been on. The council and the police department have been working very closely over the last few years to try to get to a point where we could propose something that we knew was real. And what we proposed is exactly what you're going to get. That's why you see the facility design, the specific cost structure broke down. We know exactly when we're going to be able to start construction. We have a realistic time frame for when that construction will be completed. We have a general idea of how the facility layout is going to look and where departments will go and how that process will take place. So it's just really kind of a complicated situation. Our police department has 54 sworn officers. and another dozen or so or more non-sworn, administrative support type positions and civilian positions. So it's just a large department, and these kind of decisions for how we move forward, they really take a long time. I would encourage the questioner to go back and look through some of the old meetings, or reach out to me, and I can point you to specific meetings in particular where we really fleshed out the specifics of the proposals and why this particular proposal was chosen. It's been an interesting journey.
Thank you, Mayor. And I know that you touched on it a little bit during the presentation, but just to kind of follow up on this question, can you talk a little bit more also about what happens if this bond doesn't pass, in terms of what KPD, where they would be housed, what that would look like?
Well, happily, it's really tricky, because what I said earlier about going to the voters to allow for the voters to weigh in, really also it causes us to have to assess the amount of risk that we want to take, because the police department absolutely needs to expand. That's unquestionable. Now the Proposition A, that's for voters to decide. We've tried very hard to get to a point where we could propose this bond to the voters, but if the bond fails by state statute, because we proposed it to the voters, we will be prohibited from issuing any debt for this facility for 3 years. Meaning that if it fails over the course of the next 3 years, we're going to have to decide essentially what we're going to do. So one of the options that was put together in this presentation earlier would be to potentially lease a facility somewhere. We don't have a facility like that that we've currently been able to get our minds wrapped around, but that's going to be the next step. And leasing facility costs money as well. So it's not a zero sum. If you vote no, we won't be able to invest, and therefore there won't be a cost associated with an expanding police department. The police department has to expand with the growing city. And as we've mentioned, we're at just over 1 sworn officer per 1,000 residents, and the ideal number is 1.5. So not only are we trying to grow with the city as it grows, but we're trying to actually increase the amount of sworn officers per 1,000 residents. So there's just pressure from all different kinds of levels to expand the police department. This facility, while it's a big number, would allow for us to take one of the main problems that we have, which is space, and take it off the table, because that would be a fully solved problem. And then after that, we would be able to focus on building out the department itself without wondering where we would put someone. Because right now, if we hire a new officer, record specialist, etc., it's difficult to even figure out where that position will be located, because we're just out of space. So over the next few years, the answer is, if it passes, or if it doesn't pass, we very much would be having to look for space to lease. Because the voters would have told us that they don't want us to borrow money, which is, of course, the voters' prerogative.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I know you might have some thoughts on this as well. Would you add anything to that in terms of what KPD would be looking to do if this bond were not passed?
Well, I think the mayor answered that part really well. The building is a commitment to our community. It would be the appropriate building to provide the services that we talked about throughout the evening. And it would finally give a building that has all of the facilities and needs of a modern police department. So I think as to what we're going to do, that's certainly the mayor and the council's decision, and we support that. But I do think this building, as it is now, as it is designed, and I think it's going to allow us to further engage with the community, offer more services to the community. And I think that's really the aspect that's most important to the police department.
Great, thank you, Chief. And it looks like we don't have any other questions in the Q&A right now, so we'll give a couple more moments in case a few more come in. Looks like we've had another question come in from Facebook from Jerry. If Prop A doesn't pass, what are the city's plans? Mayor and Chief, I know you spoke about that a little bit from the perspective of how the KPD would be housed. Is there anything else you might add in terms of the city's plans related to Proposition A if it were not to pass?
I think I might be able to add just a couple of more comments. It would certainly cause a delay in the growth and additional services that we hope to add. With the Victim Services Division specifically has a really good opportunity for growth for adding additional staff and volunteers, but they need the proper facilities in order to conduct their business in private. If you can imagine being a victim of crime and you want to come in and speak to somebody, you need a private office space that is suitable for a confidential interview that's both comfortable and allows that person to share their information and receive services from a trained specialist in private. The same goes for our mental health specialist and our juvenile officers. This facility will provide them the offices with which to conduct their daily duties and provide both dignity and privacy to the victims and the people that they serve here in the community. I think that's one of the biggest changes that would happen, is that we would have to delay adding some of those very, very worthwhile services to the community. Additionally, another thing that would happen is some of our training that we would hope to bring into the new facility with the proper training rooms for all of our staff, not just the officers, but all of our staff, to include dispatchers, records personnel, animal control, code enforcement. We would have to either outsource that training because we do not have the proper training facilities in our current building. We don't have enough space to allow for those training courses. So we will either have to delay those or continue to outsource those, which are far more costly if we send somebody to training to incur hotel costs and meal expenses, as opposed to being able to host that training right here in our own police department and let our people train locally. Those are two of the things that come to mind quickly.
Yeah, I've got a couple things to add to that as well. So what Chief said about the facilities being inadequate for things just like interviews is certainly true, and it's not an understatement, because I've seen it. I've seen where the rooms are and how they're connected to the greater facility, and we need better interview rooms, as well as things like a place for officers to shower. Currently, our facility doesn't have that. There's no place for our officers to practice physical fitness or to make sure that they're meeting those standards that are set forth. And I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that if the bond doesn't pass, the problem isn't solved. We're going to have to spend money one way or the other. I think this facility proposal is a fairly efficient proposal, which is why I think the council supported putting it before the voters. But if the bond fails, the reality is we're going to have to do something. Probably the biggest impact is going to be on officer recruitment, because everything exists in balance. When you're trying to recruit the best officers and give them the best training, you only have so many levers that you can pull. One of them is culture, and that's something that we're always trying to do is increase the culture and the community policing aspect of our department. But another is just basically having a facility or having offerings like salaries, wages, programs, training, opportunities that officers will want to take, that will cause the city of Kyle to stand out, so that we can recruit and retain the best of the best. We have standards that we try to set across all departments in the city of Kyle, from parks to admin, and that includes public safety and our police department. We are not afraid as a council to set those standards regardless of department. And this facility, if it is passed, will give us the opportunity to really, I think, do a lot of recruiting, because we'll be able to show officers that the community here supports them. And these facilities, I think, would allow for those officers to feel really good about coming into the city of Kyle. So officer recruitment, I would think, would also be something affected either way. It kind of hangs on the balance, I think, in November. The other thing to think about is if the bond fails, well, you lose that lever. So if you're trying to recruit the best officers, the only other thing you have is wages. Wages is something that the city of Kyle and the council has taken a proactive approach to try to elevate the wages to make sure that our officers are paid on par with other surrounding jurisdictions. But the city of Kyle struggles financially because we don't generate as much sales tax as some of our other communities. And we're very reliant on single family residential developments to fund our budget. And that is challenging because single family residential requires a lot of services to be provided to. And it doesn't give us that extra money that we need to be able to necessarily give the officers and our employees just in general the best pay in the county, for example, or even on par with or close to the best pay in the county. So we've been trying for the last few years, including the meet and confer agreement that we just passed a year ago, to get our officers pay up to that level, including 7% raises last year, this year, and next year. With all of that, it's still only bringing the officers up close to what some of the other cities in the area provide. The hope was that the public safety facility, in conjunction with the increased wages, would be the right combination such that we can get the very best officers. If the public safety facility fails, really the only option that is left, I think, on the table is going to be wages. And so that will be something when the meet and confer agreement goes to completion that we'll have to take up at that point in time, because if the facilities are not adequate in any way, it's a strike against the city, meaning officers would likely be hesitant to want to come here because there's no place for them to work. They can't take a shower. They can't, they don't have break rooms, training rooms, all these facilities. It's just very, very not on par with where we should be for a city of our size. So those are all the factors. It's very complicated, but when you're talking about budgeting for a facility versus the operational budget, you can't separate them. They're all connected together. And so what we're trying to do is set that course, set that future up so that the facility needs are met, meaning that's one obstacle for recruiting the best officers that's taken off the table. So hopefully we can continue to grow and not have to lower our standards for officers that we hire.
Thank you, Mayor. And that actually leads into what will be our last question for the evening. We have one more question from Echo on Facebook, and this one I'll have Chief speak to. Echo asks, what does the police department need to do or add in order to get the certifications they need? And she mentions that this was brought up on a previous meeting, but Chief, could you speak a little bit more about some of those accreditations that were mentioned in the presentation?
Yes, so there are two accreditation bodies that the Kyle Police Department seeks to obtain the proper accreditation. First, we're going to look at the Texas Police Chiefs Association recognition program. That recognition program brings forth a set of policies and procedures and operational guidelines that help make sure that our police department would be operating under the standards expected across the state of Texas. Those standards ensure that we are operating with transparency, that we are following all of the modern protocols for law enforcement agencies, and that all of our hiring practices and internal operations meet the current standard. The national level, often called CALIA, is used oftentimes from coast to coast. That is a very, very similar program. The main difference for us here in Texas is that the Texas Police Chiefs Recognition Program is very geared towards Texas law enforcement and Texas operations, and also happens to be a little less costly than the national program to both achieve and sustain. Both of those are designed to help departments set a standard that's expected across their region, across their state, across national borders. And we want to follow those so that we can ensure our community that our department is professional, that we are following protocols that are modern police departments. And in order to achieve that, we need to be able to follow the policies that we enact, following those guidelines. The things that we need to add, obviously, are more storage for our evidence room and all of the modern technologies that evidence rooms have today. We need to be able to add additional space for our officers to perform additional functions. Record keeping is a big function of the process, and we need to make certain that we have all of the right logistics, the right personnel, the right training, and the right policies in place to ensure that we can achieve those Texas recognition guidelines, as well as the CALIA, should we pursue those down the line. Again, they're both very similar programs. There's no requirement to do either, and you can choose one over the other. The Texas Police Chiefs program is very well respected across the state, probably even outside the state. And again, it's just designed to make sure that we're operating under the most current procedures expected in today's law enforcement agencies, and that we're operating with transparency, and that we are able to meet the needs of our community, and they know what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's like an open book on how our police operations are modeled.
Great, thank you, Chief. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Mayor Mitchell, for the presentation, and to Chief Barnett, as well as our other panelists, for being available to answer questions. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.